It was late afternoon when we finally reached Mulberry Mountain, far beyond the well-worn paths of the Ozark National Forest. Tyler had insisted on leading us deep into the backcountry, promising solitude far away from the usual weekend campers. There were 5 of us: me, Tyler, Rachel, Marcus, and Jess. We set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by dense stands of white oak and hickory. The trees pressed in close, their leafy canopy filtering sunlight into soft, muted streaks across the forest floor. As we pitched our tents, Marcus cracked jokes about bears and mountain lions, but I noticed Rachel's eyes flicker nervously toward the shadowy woods. I smiled and tried to reassure her, saying it was all part of the adventure. Still, there was a strange tension in the air, the kind you don't really notice until later. By the time we gathered around the campfire, the sky had turned a deep orange. The sun dipped behind the distant ridges, casting long shadows across the clearing. Jess pulled out her phone and snapped a few photos, capturing our silhouettes against the fading light. That's when we first heard it too. Sharp whistles echoed faintly from the trees. They were crisp and clear, like someone calling. A dog back home. Tyler raised an eyebrow and looked around the circle. Anyone else hear that? Marcus shrugged. Probably another group of campers nearby. Jess leaned forward, smirking. 2 quick whistles, right? Maybe it's Morse code. Maybe they're trying to tell us something important, like they're out of marshmallows. We all laughed except Rachel. She stayed quiet, her eyes locked on the darkening woods. The fire crackled low. Sparks drifted upward into the evening sky, swallowed by the growing darkness. Then Tyler spoke, his voice quieter than usual. You know, I read some weird stuff online about this area. Some hikers claimed people have disappeared out here, east of Shores Lake toward Dunn Hollow. Said something about it being bad ground. Marcus rolled his eyes. Come on, Tyler. Those stories are just meant to scare tourists. But Tyler didn't smile. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending embers swirling upward. Just figured you guys should know. I glanced at Rachel. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the firelight as she stared silently into the trees. Darkness settled over the camp completely, bringing with it a heavy, oppressive silence. Only the occasional crackle of firewood broke the stillness. I felt strangely exposed, sitting there in that clearing, surrounded by towering trees whose trunks vanished into the shadows. Then, just before we turned in, the whistles came again, clearer this time. They cut through the night air like sharp blades. Jess tensed, sitting up straight. Okay, seriously, that's closer, isn't it? Her voice had a nervous edge now. Tyler stood slowly, sweeping his flashlight over the edge of the camp. The beam revealed nothing, just the empty forest. Rachel whispered, I don't think anyone else is out here. Jess grabbed her audio recorder. She was determined to catch something, some proof. Without waiting, she walked cautiously toward the trees, holding the device in front of her. We watched as her slender figure slipped into the darkness, her flashlight casting a pale beam across the underbrush. She stopped a few yards out and lifted the recorder, standing still. Silence returned. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then distinctly, from somewhere right behind Jess, came to short, piercing whistles. She whirled around, her flashlight jerking wildly through the shadows. Her voice cracked with panic. Who's there? Tyler and I sprinted over, our flashlights cutting through the gloom. We reached Jess in seconds. She stood trembling, eyes wide with disbelief. I swear to God. She whispered urgently. Someone was standing right behind me. We searched the immediate area, beams slicing through trees and brush, casting long shadows across the undergrowth and rough bark. But there was nothing. No footprints, no broken twigs, no disturbance of any kind. Rachel rushed over and pulled Jess close. Her voice shook. We should go back. Let's leave first thing tomorrow. Tyler nodded, grim. Yeah, we'll head east. Catch that trail, loop back toward the car. We returned to camp, subdued and weary. The fire had burned down low, leaving only glowing embers that threw faint, flickering light across our uneasy faces. As I crawled into my sleeping bag, I tried to shake the image of Jess frozen in fear, alone in the dark, but it stuck with me. Lay awake for a long time, listening. Sometime around midnight, as I drifted in and out of restless sleep, I heard it again. 2 sharp whistles, soft, just beyond the edge of our camp, closer than before. At dawn, we packed quickly, each of us driven by the same silent urgency. We wanted to get out. We needed to leave behind whatever had happened the night before. The morning air felt colder, sharper. We hiked east toward White Rock Mountain. Tyler led the way, assuring us that this lesser-known trail would eventually loop us back to the car, but his voice didn't sound confident anymore. By late morning, the forest thickened. The trail narrowed, fading into patches of tangled underbrush and knee-high weeds. We began to see signs of old campsites abandoned and decayed. Rotting tops tangled in the brush. Fire pits, scorched black, filled with damp leaves and broken debris. They didn't look like normal campsites. They looked deserted, like someone had left in a hurry. Fled. Marcus stopped and crouched beside something half buried in the dirt. He dug it out, a rusted pocket knife. Its handle was warped, twisted, as if it had been exposed to extreme heat. He turned it slowly in his hand, frowning. "What would make something like this?" he muttered, voice tight. Asterisk. Tyler didn't answer. He glanced down at his map, brows furrowed, his eyes shifting uneasily toward the surrounding trees. Rachel moved in closer to Jess, whispering something meant to be comforting, but it didn't sound convincing. And the woods had gone. Silent. No wind, no rustling leaves, not even birdsong, just an oppressive, unnatural stillness. We set camp early that day. Exhaustion clung to us like fog, our limbs heavy with tension. Tyler placed trail cams around the perimeter, lit electronic, eyes fastened to tree trunks, aimed at nothing and everything. Jess set her phone to record audio, carefully propping it on a rock near her tent. As dusk approached, the feeling returned, that same creeping dread, only now it was stronger. None of us spoke much. We sat close to the fire, each of us lost in our own thoughts, eyes drifting to the edge of the clearing where the dark slowly swallowed the woods. Then just as the last traces of light faded, the whistles returned. 2 sharp notes, clear and deliberate. They echoed across the clearing, closer this time, more precise, calculated, like someone or something was watching us. Hidden, waiting. The whistles came again, this time from a different direction, then another, circling us, moving from one side of the camp to the other. My heart pounded. The air felt thicker now, heavy, like it didn't want to be breathed. Marcus cursed under his breath, his eyes scanning the tree line. Something was out there. Something that knew exactly where we were, clear as day from shadow to shadow. The sound seemed to move. "Who's out there?" Tyler shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. The forest responded with silence. Then another sharp whistle, that this time directly ahead, tauntingly close, yet still nothing visible. Jess pressed her back against a tree, her face pale as bone. Rachel clutched her arm, eyes wide, scanning the tree line. "We need to check the cameras," Tyler said, his voice low but firm. Marcus hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded. Together we approached the nearest tree where the first trail cam had been placed. I watched as Tyler reached for the strapand, found nothing but a loose, dangling piece of fabric. The camera was gone, cleanly removed. The mount itself was untouched. No damage, no signs of struggle. The device had simply vanished. A chill ran through me. We moved quickly around the camp, checking each tree. Every single trail cam gone, meticulously removed. It didn't feel random. It felt planned. Intentional. Jess, her hands trembling, pulled out her phone. "I recorded something earlier. Maybe it caught whoever did this." We crowded around her as she hit play. At first, just silence, then 2 short whistles, startlingly loud, but that wasn't all. Beneath the whistles, something else began to emerge, a sound buried under the static, a voice, whispering, hurried, desperate, strained. Jess turned the volume up. We all leaned in. The voice said, "Don't move, it sees sound." Rachel gasped, stumbling backward. Marcus stared at the phone in Jess's shaking hand, his mouth slightly open. Tyler lowered his voice, almost inaudible. "Done hollow," he muttered. "We must be close." "What's done hollow?" Marcus snapped, eyes narrowing. Tyler hesitated, then finally answered, "Grim loggers disappeared here over a century ago. Locals said something hunted them, something that could mimic sounds, voices, animals, even whistles." He paused, glancing around. "They called it cursed land. Nobody came here after that." Rachel turned toward him slowly, voice cold. "You knew?" "I didn't think it was real," Tyler replied weakly. Silence fell. Not normal silence, the kind that crushes your chest, the kind that feels alive. My heart thudded in my ears. I looked at Marcus. His expression had twisted, part fear, part fury. Then it happened. Multiple whistles, all at once, dozens of them, high and low, near and far. A chilling, layered chorus coming from all directions, surrounding us, closing in. Marcus broke. He bolted, flashlight swinging wildly as he disappeared into the dark trees. "Marcus!" Tyler shouted, chasing after him, but his voice was quickly lost beneath the terrifying flood of overlapping whistles. Minutes passed, long aching minutes. Finally, Tyler and I gathered enough courage to follow. We pushed into the trees, calling Marcus's name, but the forest swallowed our words like water down a drain. Then Rachel stopped. She pointed upward, her hand trembling violently. Nearly 12 feet above us, caught in the bark of an old oak tree, fluttered a torn piece of Marcus's jacket. My stomach dropped. He couldn't have gotten up there. Jess's voice broke through the silence, hoarse and low. He couldn't have climbed that." Tyler stared at the torn fabric for a long moment, then whispered, "No, he couldn't." We said nothing else, just retreated silently back to camp, each of us numb with fear. We zipped our tents shut tight. The whistles returned again, closer, more persistent, more intentional. Marcus was gone, and somehow we all understood. He wasn't coming back. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay awake, straining to hear every movement outside. Jess was curled beside Rachel, her breath shallow, her eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on the fabric ceiling. Tyler sat up the entire time, still and watchful, his hand gripping the tent zipper, as if just checking to make sure it hadn't been undone. Marcus's absence hung over us like a weight. Heavy, suffocating, impossible to ignore. At dawn, we emerged from our tents, exhausted and silent. No one spoke as we packed our gear quickly. Tyler checked his GPS, brow furrowed. He turned the device over in his palm, tapping the screen. It flickered erratically, coordinates jumping without logic, like it didn't know where we were anymore. "Something's wrong with this," he muttered, frustration tightening his voice. "It's useless." Rachel glanced around, eyes flicking from tree to tree, her hands clenched at her sides. "We should just retrace our steps, go back the way we came." Tyler nodded slowly, but doubt clouded his face. We set off again, hiking faster than the day before. An urgency pushed us forward, glancing over his shoulders every few minutes. But something wasn't right. After hours of walking, nothing looked familiar. Hills rose abruptly where there had been none. Streams ran backward, against gravity and map logic. Trees loomed taller, closer. The forest itself felt wrong, like it had twisted behind us, rewritten the terrain when we weren't looking. By midday, I noticed Jess humming quietly at first. I didn't pay attention, then it hit me. The tune, those two tones. It was the whistle, the same pattern we'd heard every night. My stomach clenched. "Jess," I snapped, louder than I intended. She flinched, startled. Her eyes were glassy, distant. "What?" she whispered hoarsely. "You were humming the whistle," Rachel said softly, her voice trembling. Jess's hand flew to her mouth in horror. I didn't even realize." Her voice faded into silence. "Keep moving," Tyler urged, gripping his pack straps tight. His eyes never left the trail ahead. Within minutes, Ben stopped suddenly. His eyes were wide, his head tilted like he was listening to something none of us could hear. "What is it?" I asked warily. His eyes filled with sudden tears. His voice broke. "I hear my mom. She's calling me. She's close." Rachel's expression twisted in pain. "Ben's mother had died 3 years ago. Ben, listen to me. It can't be her." "But," he shook his head, frantic now. His eyes scanned the trees. "I know her voice. She's right here, just ahead." Before we could stop him, Ben bolted. He crashed through the underbrush, ignoring our screams behind him. "Ben!" Rachel sobbed openly as we chased after him, our legs catching on roots, faces scratched by low branches. But Ben was gone. No sound, no trace, only silence. Heavy, crushing. We kept moving, but barely spoke, exhausted, desperate. Late in the afternoon, we stumbled into a clearing. Rising from the weeds was an old fire. "Lookout tower." Lookout tower, rusty, leaning, weather dash beaten. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe we could finally see where we were. Maybe we could find a way out. As we approached, that hope withered. The metal supports were gouged, deep claw marks raked across rusted steel beams. My skin crawled, my pulse quickened. Tyler didn't hesitate. He climbed quickly, ignoring the groans of the old structure. Jess, Rachel and I followed, the tower swaying beneath our feet. At the top, we squeezed into the narrow observation room. Dust caked the windows. Beyond them, the forest stretched forever, indistinguishable in every direction. Rachel opened a small cabinet and pulled out a leather-bound logbook. A ranger's journal. She flipped through its yellowed pages anxiously, then stopped. Her face went pale. She read aloud, voice barely steady. "August 15th, 1994. Two-tone whistle heard again. Third hiker gone. Ordered to evacuate. We're not alone in this forest." Cold dread washed through me. Jess pressed her forehead against the glass, breathing raggedly. The sun was dipping below the trees, casting a strange amber glow across the forest, and then we heard them, the whistles. Not one, not two, dozens, high-pitched and low. From every direction, a mocking chorus. Surrounding the tower like wolves circling prey. Louder, closer, mixed in. I heard something else. A voice, calling for help. Tyler's voice from deep below us. In the trees, we turned to look at him. He stood, frozen, eyes wide, lips trembling. "That's not me," he whispered, shaking his head. The whistles grew louder, so loud, they seemed to vibrate through the tower walls. Tyler grabbed Rachel's shoulders, locking eyes with her. "You have to run," he said. "Go east, downhill, don't stop, don't look back. I'll distract it." "No," Rachel sobbed. "I'm not leaving now," Tyler shouted, firm and unyielding. Before we could argue, he yanked a flare from his pack and struck it. It exploded in a blaze of red light. He moved fast, tossing the flare into a heap of dry wood at the base of the tower. Flames roared up instantly, heat rushing up the metal like a breath from below. He shouted again, his voice nearly lost in the sound of fire and whistles. Rachel and Jess fled first, scrambling down the ladder. I followed close behind, heart hammering, sweat pouring down my back. Just before I climbed over the last rung, I looked up. Tyler stood silhouetted against the inferno, holding a second flare ready to face whatever was coming. Alone at the base of the tower. The smoke thickened quickly. It rolled across the ground in choking waves, stinging our eyes, filling our lungs. We ran. Branches clawed at our faces. Roots reached up to snag our feet. Panic guided us more than sight. Jess tripped. She fell hard to the forest floor, gasping. Rachel spun back, grabbing her arm and yanking her up, but Jess didn't move. She stood frozen, her eyes wide, fixed on something behind us, staring into the thickening wall of smoke. "Something's moving," she breathed. I turned, just long enough to catch a glimpse of something huge, shifting between the trees. Its form was vague, shadowy, but it moved fast. Too fast, too fast. And the sound of whistles had changed, twisting, melting into something lower. Deeper guttural sounds that reverberated through the trees. It wasn't just mimicking anymore, it was hunting. Jess shoved Rachel hard, pushing her forward. "Go," she whispered urgently. Then she turned to face the smoke. We didn't look back. We sprinted blindly, lungs burning, legs screaming. Terror gave us strength. The forest swallowed us whole. I don't know how long we ran. Minutes, maybe hours. Time bled away into the darkness. Eventually, I stumbled onto something hard, gravel. A road. I collapsed, chest heaving, gasping for breath. Rachel emerged seconds later. Her face was streaked with dirt, tears tracing clean lines down her cheeks. Her eyes were empty, hollow, but Jess never came out. She never followed. Days later, the rangers found nothing. No sign of Tyler or Marcus or Ben. No sign of Jess. Just Rachel and me. The only ones left. The official report blamed wildfires, said the area had become unstable, dangerous. They closed it off. Quietly, Dunn Hollow was removed from maps, erased like it had never existed. There was no real investigation because the truth couldn't be explained. There was no fire, there was something else. Something still out there, waiting, watching. Sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet and still, I hear it again. Too sharp. Whistles. Drifting in the dark. Just beyond my window, an invitation. One I will never answer. Story number 2. My name is Trevor Martinez. I've always preferred the solitude of hiking alone, just me, nature, and my GoPro capturing every moment for the small audience I've built online. There's a certain clarity that comes with isolation, especially in places like Los Padres National Forest, where the terrain is raw, remote, and unapologetically wild. This trip was supposed to be simple, a 2-night loop along the Devil's Backbone Trail, starting from the nearest campground. Done my research, steep ridgelines, thorny chaparral, the occasional wildlife warning, nothing I hadn't handled before. It was late spring, the California heat hadn't fully set in yet, so conditions were ideal. I hit the trail at dawn, camera rolling. Birds chirped sporadically as I moved through the dry terrain, my boots crunching steadily over loose gravel and sunbaked dirt. By mid-morning, that sound, my boots against the trail, was the only thing keeping me company. Around noon, the path began to narrow, the chaparral thickened, slapping at my sleeves as I pushed through. Then, on an exposed ridge, I saw it. Perched just off the trail, on a wide boulder, stood a strange stack of stones. At first glance, it looked like the typical rock cairn hikers leave to mark their route, but something felt off. Cautiously, I approached it. It wasn't just a pile of rocks. The stones spiraled inward, tight, intentional. There was no clear marker, no direction, no message. Probably just someone's weird art project. I muttered to myself with a dry laugh, but my voice echoed strangely in the stillness. I didn't linger. I moved on. As the hours passed and the light began to stretch thin, I started seeing more of them, more spiraling cairns, each one smaller and more intricate than the last. They led away from the main trail, pulling deeper into the rugged hills and winding canyons. Curiosity tugged at me. Maybe it was a forgotten historical trail, or something left behind by locals. The idea of discovering something hidden sparked a sense of adventure. I checked my GPS. The screen flickered weakly. The signal dropped in and out beneath the thickening canopy. Still, I felt prepared, well-equipped, confident. So, I veered off the main path, letting those mysterious spirals guide me. The terrain grew rougher, steeper, darker, more overgrown. Fallen pine needles blanketed the ground, and thick underbrush tugged at my pack. I followed the spirals downhill into a narrow canyon, one that didn't show up on any of my maps. At the bottom, I found a small trickle of water, barely enough to fill my canteen. It felt like a good place to stop for the night. I set up camp beneath a canopy of oak and sycamore trees. The shade was thick, the silence even thicker that night. Sleep was restless. Every creak of the branches overhead, every rustle in the brush, set my nerves on edge. Twice, I sat up abruptly, convinced I heard footsteps circling my camp, but each time I swept my flashlight across the trees. Nothing stared back but shadows and tangled limbs. Eventually, exhaustion. I drifted into a thin, uneasy sleep. Just before dawn, I woke again, sharp and alert, my pulse racing. I didn't know why at first, then it hit me. The forest was silent, no wind, no birds, not even the hum of insects. Nothing. A heavy, unnatural stillness had settled in, and I shivered despite the warmth of the night. I reached for my camera, clicking it on with trembling fingers. I whispered, "Something feels off here, like I shouldn't have followed those cairns." Then I stopped. A sound had surfaced above me, faint, delicate, deliberate, a subtle scraping like fingernails, dragging lightly across bark. I froze. My breath caught in my chest, my hand raised, the camera slowly toward the treetops, lens trembling as I scanned the canopy. and for the briefest moment, I saw something, a shape vaguely human, standing still among the limbs, motionless, watching, double quotes, hello. I called out, my voice cracking in the silence, but silence was all that answered. It swallowed my words whole. I told myself it was just the trees, my tired mind. Shadows playing tricks in half-light, but the feeling lingered. Even as the first pale streaks of dawn touched the canyon walls, that thought clung to me like a cold fog. It knows I'm lost. Morning came dull and dim. Sunlight filtered weakly through the dense oak canopy, barely enough to light the forest floor. I sat up, groggy, rubbing my face, trying to shake off the night's unease. I checked my GPS again. The screen glitched, distorted, the arrow spun slowly, in place, refusing to settle. No signal, no direction. I pulled out my compass, it trembled in my hand. The needle twitched and spun, unable to find true north. Frustration clawed at me. I rarely got lost, and never this badly. Determined to find my way back, I broke down camp quickly, packed up my gear, and started climbing out of the canyon, certain I could retrace my steps, but the trail had vanished. Every hill looked the same. Every gully, every bend, every cluster of trees, they all repeated in some endless, mocking loop. The deeper I went, the more uncertain I became. Late in the morning, I stumbled across a single cairn, but this one was different. It wasn't intact. It had been toppled. The stones were scattered, as if someone or something had knocked them down, deliberately. That cairn hadn't fallen by accident nearby. In the soft soil, I spotted fresh tracks. I leaned in for a closer look. The print resembled a human foot, but longer, with oddly spread toes. Each toe was pressed deeply into the dirt. A chill crept up my spine. I straightened slowly, scanning the trees in every direction, watching, listening. There was nothing I could see, but I felt it. That undeniable sensation of being watched, followed by noon. Desperation had set in. My water supply was nearly gone, and the heat had intensified. I needed to find a stream soon. I pushed down a steep, overgrown hillside, thorns and branches tearing at my arms and face, until I finally reached a narrow stream trickling weakly through a grove of trees. Relief surged through me, but it didn't last. When I tried to fill my filter bottle, it clogged immediately. The water was thick with fine, muddy silt, completely undrinkable. Panic gnawed at my composure. My legs felt weaker, my thoughts clouded with every step. I knew dehydration could kill out here fast, especially alone, but the worst was still coming. As I stumbled onward, I came across something that turned my stomach. A crude makeshift shelter, sloppily built from twisted branches and pine boughs, hidden beneath low-hanging trees. I approached slowly, heart pounding. Inside, I found a torn, faded daypack half buried beneath debris. I knelt down, opened it. Inside was a slab of bark etched into its surface, words carved with a shaking hand. No trail leads out, it follows in silence. My hands shook as I dropped the bark. I backed away, nearly falling over, breath ragged. The forest was still. No birds, no insects, not even the wind. Just silence, thick, crushing, unnatural for the rest of the afternoon. I pressed forward, forcing myself uphill. I marked trees with my knife, cutting slashes into bark to keep track of my route. But after hours of struggling through the underbrush, I circled back to the same shelter. My knife marks gone. Erased. I stared at the trees around me in disbelief. Had I gone in circles, or was something removing the marks? I screamed, is anyone there? My voice bounced off the canyon walls, echoing back to me in jagged pieces, daunting. Empty. The sun dipped fast. Darkness spilled in like a rising tide. I had no choice but to make camp again, this time beneath a towering, gnarled oak that seemed to lean in unnaturally close. Every nerve in my body screamed for me to run, but there was nowhere to go. Night swallowed the canyon and I didn't sleep. Every time I drifted off, I'd jolt awake, and I'd heard something moving just outside the tent. My GoPro was still recording, its tiny red light blinking steadily. I turned toward it, whispering hoarsely, it's been watching me. I'm not imagining this. My voice trembled. I paused, listening. At first, there was nothing. Then, from somewhere deep in the canyon, a voice, faint, familiar, repeating my words, it's been watching me. I'm not imagining this. The exact tone, the exact inflection. It was my own voice, but it wasn't coming from the camera. It was coming from the woods. My heart pounded wildly as I curled deeper into the sleeping bag, gripping the camera so tightly my knuckles ached. In that moment, something became terrifyingly clear. I wasn't alone, and whatever was out there wasn't going to let me leave this canyon alive. From here, the memory blurs. Hunger, thirst, fear, everything distorted. Reality frayed at the edges. Every shadow seemed to breathe. Every sound echoed too long. What I'm about to describe next is based on the footage recovered, what rescuers and investigators later pieced together. What came next, I barely remember. The memory is fractured, foggy, but the GoPro didn't forget. The footage showed me standing near a cluster of moss-covered rocks beside a sluggish, muddy creek. When I finally watched it, I barely recognized myself. My eyes were hollow, my cheeks sunken, dirt streaked my face. and clothed. My breathing was shallow, uneven on the screen. I spoke urgent and trembling, exhaustion leaking through every word. "I've been circling for hours," I said. "It's keeping me here. Every path leads back to the same place. Every mark I make disappears." Suddenly, something caught my attention. I turned my head sharply, eyes wide. The camera swung with me, jerking upward toward the dense, tangled canopy. "Who's there?" I shouted. My voice cracked with panic. Silence. Thick, suffocating. Then from the distance, a voice echoed. It sounded exactly like mine, calling for help, then sobbing. I staggered, knees buckling. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "That isn't me. It can't be." But the voice continued, desperate, pleading, floating through the canyon like a twisted echo of my own terror. The camera shook violently as I turned and bolted, crashing through the underbrush, driven by instinct and panic. Moments later, the footage showed me collapsed on the ground in a small clearing. I turned the lens toward myself. "This might be the last recording," I whispered, breath ragged. "If someone finds this, don't follow the cairns. Don't trust your eyes." I looked over my shoulder. "It's mimicking me. It wants me trapped here." Then, I did the only thing I could think of. I wedged the GoPro into the crook of a tree branch, pointing it toward the narrow trail behind me. It was a desperate attempt to leave behind some kind of warning, a message. I hesitated for just a second. Then, I turned and staggered out of frame. That was the last time I was seen. Rescuers found the camera weeks later, exactly where I had left it. They combed the canyon for days, tracking dogs, helicopters, search teams. They covered every ridge and ravine, but there was no sign of me, no footprints, no gear, no scraps of clothing. Nothing. I had vanished. Then, they discovered one last recording. That timestamp showed it was taken 36 hours after my final appearance, long after anyone believed I could have still been alive. The camera had been triggered again. Motion, sound. They couldn't be sure. The clip was short, less than a minute. Moonlight barely lit the trees. The frame was dark, murky. First, nothing moved. Then, a shadow shifted just at the edge of the frame. Subtle, silent, indistinct. Then came the sound. Breathing. A low, rasping exhale so close to the microphone, it made my skin crawl when I watched it later. And then, just before the video ended, a voice. My voice, but not quite. Colder, emptier, hollow. It spoke clearly. "You're next." Those words still echo in my head. A warning, or maybe a promise. Something is still out there, hiding in that nameless canyon along Devil's Backbone Trail, watching, waiting in silence. Story number 3. I took the seasonal forestry job in New Hampshire, mostly because I needed isolation, a break from crowded city streets. And fluorescent lit office cubicles. After years of managing digital records for a small company in Boston, the silence and solitude promised by the White Mountain National Forest felt like salvation. My name is Derek Madsen. For the next 6 months, I was assigned basic maintenance duties, clearing debris, updating trail signage, and monitoring visitor safety. The ranger outpost I'd been assigned to, Cabin 11, sat deep in the Great Gulf Wilderness, a remote corner, shadowed by Mount Washington's jagged, unforgiving peak. The first day began with a grueling 6-mile hike. I lugged heavy gear along a narrow, overgrown trail, the pack straps digging into my shoulders. Sweat clung to the back of my neck, soaking the collar of my flannel shirt. By the time I spotted the cabin tucked between dense spruce trees, the sun was already fading. Long streaks of orange and purple painted the surrounding peaks. I opened the creaky wooden door and stepped inside. The scent hit me immediately: old cedar, damp fabric, and decades of stale air. The interior was simple: sparse furnishings, a battered cat, a plain wooden desk, the shelves lined with canned beans and rusting coffee tins left behind by rangers long gone. Dust floated gently in the dying sunlight, drifting like snowflakes through the warm orange glow. On the desk sat a thick leather-bound logbook. Curious, I flipped it open. The pages were yellowed and brittle, some curling at the corners. Names and dates stretched back nearly 20 years. Most entries were routine: patrolled trail, clear weather, removed fallen branches, no wildlife sightings. But as I turned deeper into the log, something odd began to appear. A pattern: Cabin 27, inspection overdue. Cabin 27, lantern out. Cabin 27, claw damage on interior beam. Over and over again. Different handwriting, different years, sometimes months apart, but always Cabin 27. My brow furrowed. I reached into my pack and pulled out the official Forest Service map. I flipped through the laminated binder maps, inventories, cabin logs, all neatly organized, but there was no mention of Cabin 27, not listed on any map. Not marked as a ruin, not even noted as a historical site. Nothing. I shook my head, feeling a cold knot forming in my gut. Still, I picked up the radio and called the nearest ranger station. It took a few tries before a crackling voice finally responded. "Ranger station." "Go ahead." "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Can someone confirm something for me? Is there supposed to be a Cabin 27 somewhere in the Great Gulf area?" There was a pause, longer than it should have been, when the voice came back. It was careful, hesitant, negative. "No Cabin 27 listed anywhere in Great Gulf." Probably just an old logging camp or something. Best to ignore it. I thanked him and hung up, but the unease didn't leave. If it was just a mistake, why had it been logged so many times? By so many different people? Over years, why did it keep showing up? I tried to shake it off. Dinner was simple canned beans and toast on the propane stove. Outside, the wind rattled the branches. Some of them scraped softly against the roof like fingers. I did my best to forget the log entries. Maybe it was just a bit of ranger boredom, an inside joke. Bureaucratic weirdness. Still, the words claw damage on interior beam kept echoing in my head. After dinner, I got ready for bed. The cot creaked as I stretched out, my muscles aching from the hike. Exhaustion tugged at my eyelids. But sleep was fragmented, filled with shadowy dreams of cabins buried deep in twisted, overgrown trails. I woke suddenly. It was just past midnight. I didn't know what had startled me. No sound, no flash of light. I lay still, listening. At first nothing, but the wind. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate, evenly spaced. On the front door, my chest tightened, every muscle tensed. I rose from the cot, grabbed the flashlight from the desk, and crept forward. For a long moment I just stood there, listening, frozen, then, breath shallow. I yanked the door open. The flashlight cut a beam into the forest. Nothing, just shadows. Just trees. I started to lower the light, and that's when I saw it right there, stamped clearly in the damp earth at the edge of the porch. A single wet boot print. And it wasn't mine. Morning came slow and gray. A heavy fog draped itself over the great Gulf wilderness. I hadn't slept since the knocking. The image of that lone boot print haunted every thought. I ate a stiff breakfast, cold coffee, dry bread, barely tasting any of it. My thoughts churned, stuck on the logbook, the knocking, the radio silence, the footprint. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I needed answers by mid-morning. I had maps, notes, and the logbook spread across the cabin desk. I traced each cryptic entry, trying to triangulate locations from vague references above the river. Split. Double quotes, ridge near blighted hemlocks, unmarked path past deadfall curve. Piece by piece they began to form a pattern, cross-referenced with my official topo charts. One spot stood out, a dense patch of wilderness, just off Chandler Brook. Trail. Unmapped. Isolated. Officially closed after a massive rockslide years ago. It wasn't far. I could reach it by a TV, then bushwhack the rest on foot. Before leaving, I radioed the ranger station again, gave them a vague route. I didn't mention my true destination. Something about the hesitation in that ranger's voice yesterday. It unsettled me. And now, I trusted no one. The fewer people who knew my real intentions, the better. 20 minutes later, I parked the ATV and stepped into the dense underbrush, compass and map in hand. The forest thickened fast. The terrain was knotted with fallen logs, thorny brambles, and low-hanging limbs. Every step forward was slow, deliberate. Twigs snapped underfoot, leaves crunched. Moist air clung to my skin, and within minutes my shirt was damp with sweat. An hour passed. Sunlight filtered weakly through the dense canopy above, turning pale and watery. I started to doubt my direction, pausing often, checking landmarks against the blurred photocopies in my hand. Then I noticed something. A rusted nail hammered into a tree, 30 yards ahead. Another. Then another. They formed a faint, crude trail, worn just enough to follow, as if the forest itself had tried to swallow it whole. I followed. A shiver ran down my spine as I moved deeper. The woods changed. Tree trunks, stripped bare at chest height, deep gouges clawed through bark, exposing raw, pale wood beneath, exactly like the logbook had described. The memory of those repeated notes, claw damage on interior beam, echoed. In my mind, I picked up my pace. The forest suddenly opened into a small clearing, and there, half swallowed by moss, vines, and rot, stood a sagging wooden structure. Its roof buckled, the walls bowed inward, boards bent with age and rain. Cabin 27. My breath caught. I stepped cautiously onto the creaking porch. The door hung ajar on rusted hinges. Inside, the air was thick, choking, mold, damp wood, decay. I swept my flashlight across the room. Deep, jagged, claw marks were gouged into the cabin walls. Dozens of them, furious, violent, erratic splinters jutted outward in sharp, angry angles. Dread surged in my chest. Then something drew my eyes upward. Hanging from the ceiling on a rusted chain was an old, blackened lantern. Its glass was smeared with soot, impossible to see through, and yet, when I brushed it with my fingertips, it was still warm. Faintly warm, as if it had only just gone out. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I staggered back and lowered my light. On the floor beneath the lantern was a small notebook, bound in cracked leather. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up. The pages were stiff. YELLOWED. Inside were frenzied sketches, chaotic and wild. Eyes stared out from scribbled trees. Antlers sprouted from twisted, shadowy heads. Over and over again, triangles, vertical slashes, scrawled in desperation. Symbols of madness. I snapped a few quick photos, first of the notebook, then the claw marks. As I raised the phone for another angle, the screen flickered. then died. The phone went dark, unresponsive. I pressed the power button. Nothing. Panic flickered in the edges of my mind. I turned in a slow circle, flashlight raised, scanning the shadows in the corners of the cabin. Then I heard it outside, the soft crunch of weight on leaves, a twig snapping. I moved to the doorway, hot hammering beam cutting into the darkness. I didn't see anything move, but on the muddy ground, just beyond the porch, a fresh footprint, barefoot, massive, the toes were elongated, spaced unnaturally far apart. Panic jolted through me. My compass spun wildly in my hand, useless, broken. I shoved it back into my pocket and turned away from the cabin, adrenaline surging, ran. Branches clawed at my arms and legs as I pushed blindly through the undergrowth. Branches clawed at my face, thorns tore at my sleeves, but I didn't stop running. Adrenaline drove me forward still. No matter how fast I moved, I could hear them. Footfalls. Faint but steady pacing me from the shadowed forest on either side, always just out of sight, always there by the time I stumbled breathlessly back to cabin 11. Dusk had fallen hard. My heart thundered in my chest as I slammed the door shut behind me. I locked it, then jammed a wooden chair under the handle and yanked the curtains closed. Tight. One by one, I lit every lantern in the cabin. Their flickering glow cast long twitchy shadows across the cabin walls. Sleep. Impossible outside. The silence thickened so heavy it felt like a physical presence pressing in against the windows. Then, deep into the night, it came again. 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. Boom, boom, boom. They echoed like hammer blows through the cabin walls. Then, silence. Seconds passed, dozens of them. Agonizing. Then a voice, low rasping, slipped through the window pane. Barely a whisper, but enough to freeze me where I stood. Lanterns out. The words stuck in my mind like a splinter under skin. I didn't move. I couldn't. I stood motionless in the center of cabin 11, eyes locked on the door, every muscle coiled tight with terror, but nothing happened. Just silence. We stayed that way, heavy and endless, until the sky began to pale with dawn. When light finally returned, I forced myself to open the door. The porch was torn. Fresh gouges. Deep claw marks ripped through the wooden boards. The doorframe had cracked, even the hinges warped inward, bent under pressure from outside. Something had tried to come in, and nearly succeeded. My hands trembled as I reached for the radio. Static hissed back at me. I pressed the button again, shouted into the mic. "This is Derek, at cabin 11. Something attacked last night. I found cabin 27, it's real. I need immediate assistance." More static. Then voice clipped, "Urgent. Leave now." That was all I needed. I grabbed what I could carry, map, compass, flashlight, and I ran out the cabin, into the trees, toward the main trail, toward the ranger station. My boots pounded against damp soil. Leaves and branches whipped by. My breath came ragged, my pulse relentless. Less than half a mile in, I stopped short. The path was blocked. Pine trees, freshly snapped, massive trunks split and tossed across the trail like matchsticks. This wasn't a storm, and it wasn't natural. Something had done this, and it wanted to trap me. I turned toward the river, beat a riskier route, but faster, direct. I had no choice. Rain began to fall, cold hard. It thickened into a downpour within minutes. I moved quickly, soaked to the bone, slipping on moss-slick rocks. The sound of rushing water swallowed the noise of my movement. But then, 3 taps. Knock, knock. Rhythmic. 2, perfect. I froze. It came from the trees just to my left. Flashlight shaking in my grip. I turned toward the sound, scanning. Through sheets of rain. Nothing. Then again. Tap, tap, tap. This time from behind me. Cold dread crawled up my spine. "Leave me alone," I shouted, but the forest only swallowed my voice. A movement caught my eye. Across the river, barely visible, through the curtain of rain, a shape. Tall, hunched, not moving but watching. I squinted through the downpour, trying to see clearly, but what I think I saw, shouldn't have been human. Its outline wavered, limbs too long, head tilted unnaturally to one side. Then it moved. Quickly. Jerkily. Matching my steps along the opposite bank. I broke into a run. No longer caring about footing, I stumbled again and again. My knees struck rocks, palms scraped raw, but I kept moving, clawing my way back to my feet every time. Behind me, footsteps echoed, heavy, uneven, wet, each one mirroring mine precisely. Panic gripped me, a blinding, bone-deep terror. And then my body gave out. Exhaustion overwhelmed me, my legs buckled. I collapsed hard into the mud and leaves, coughing, gasping, clawing at the air. Eyes shut tight. I tried not to breathe, not to move. The footsteps stopped, so close I could feel something watching. I lay frozen. Time crawled. Then through the rain and fear I heard something else, a sound. Static, faint, but real. My hand fumbled through my pack. I pulled out the radio, shaking as I turned the volume dial. A voice crackled through the hiss, distorted but unmistakable. "Search and rescue, do you copy? Derek, we have your coordinates. Hold tight, we're coming." I stared at the radio in disbelief. I hadn't turned it on, not since the night of the knocking. I didn't question it. I just lay there and moving waiting minutes stretched into a blur. I could barely think then. ... Light, bright, beams piercing through the trees. And voices calling my name. Hands reached down, familiar. Voices spoke gently. Faces swam into view, blurry and soaked by rain. They lifted me up and wrapped me in blankets. I couldn't stop trembling. They carried me out of the forest fast. I don't remember much of the hike back to the ranger station. The questions came quickly. I tried to explain cabin 27, the claw marks, the strange lantern. I told them everything. My voice cracked, my sentences broke apart, but I tried. Someone handed me my phone. Fully charged, I opened the photo gallery with shaking hands. There were no pictures of the cabin, not one. Only a single, blurry image remained, just mud and leaves. The rescue team exchanged looks, uncomfortable, skeptical. They didn't say it out loud, but I knew what they thought. Exposure, panic, hallucination, a mind unraveling from isolation. I quit the forestry service after that, moved far away from the White Mountains, tried to forget, but the dread never really left me. Months passed. Then one morning a plain envelope arrived in the mail. No name, no return address. Inside, just one photograph, grainy, dark, distorted by shadow but real. It showed a cabin 27. The roof sagged, claw marks gouged deep into the outer wall, and from a ceiling beam ... hung a rusted lantern still glowing faintly in the gloom. Story number 4. I've always found a certain comfort in the cold clarity of high elevations. It's one of the reasons my friend Thomas and I regularly climb in Rocky Mountain National Park. Places like Sky Pond, nestled at nearly 11,000 feet, feel both exhilarating and detached from everyday anxieties. This particular trip had a clear goal summit, Taylor Peak via the Class 4 scramble. We'd bivouacked countless times in alpine conditions before. This trip wasn't supposed to be any different. The ascent from the Glacier Gorge trailhead had gone smoothly, despite lingering patches of ice and snow. Thomas, a seasoned alpine guide from Boulder, always led with confidence, joking and chatting easily about future climbs. I, on the other hand, was typically quiet, ever cautious, a trait instilled in me from years of military training. It had served me well in the mountains. Our camp was tucked neatly onto a shelf of rock, sheltered beneath the shadow of the Shark's Tooth, a jagged pinnacle that stabbed dramatically into the Colorado sky. After setting up our bivy sacks and heating water from melting snow, we settled in early. The wind drummed steadily against our modest shelter. The sky was crisp and black, stars brittle and sharp overhead, distant and indifferent. Sleep found me quickly. I woke at dawn, stirred by the creeping chill that always settled in around first light. I sat up slowly, tugging at the zipper on my bivy sack, then paused. My eyes adjusted to the stark brightness of the fresh morning sun reflecting off scattered patches of snow. But something strange greeted me around our bivy area, where there had definitely been snow the night before. I remembered melting it myself. There now stretched a perfect circle of bare, dry earth, about 20 feet in diameter. I climbed fully out, pulling my down jacket tighter against my chest. I examined the boundary closely. The line between snow and dirt was impossibly crisp. No footprints, no disturbances of any kind, just dry, crumbly soil encircled precisely by frozen terrain. "Hey Thomas," I called quietly, not wanting to sound panicked, but unable to keep a note of urgency out of my voice. He emerged groggy from his sleeping bag, rubbing at his eyes. "What's up?" I gestured silently toward the circle. His expression shifted slowly from confusion to mild amusement. "That's just wind scour, man," he finally said, chuckling softly. "We get weird microclimates up here." I shook my head, still staring at the circle. "I've seen wind scour before," I said quietly. "This isn't it." For Thomas shrugged easily, already rummaging through his pack for food. "Well, it's weird, sure," he said casually, "but nature does strange stuff." I knelt again, pressing my palm against the cold soil. It felt dry, utterly devoid of moisture. Curious, I took out my compass. The needle quivered faintly, like it was uncertain about where north was. I glanced up at Thomas. He hadn't noticed. He was busy boiling water and chatting about which routes we should avoid due to avalanche risk. "We should go for Taylor soon," Thomas suggested cheerily. "Weather looks stable enough." "I agree," I muttered absent-mindedly, still staring at the circle. It made my skin prickle in a way I'd only experienced a few times in my life. That deep, uneasy instinct that something was subtly yet profoundly wrong. Finally, I took out my phone and snapped a photo. The stark circle of dryness glared back at me from the screen. Maybe documenting it would reassure me later. Maybe it would help normalize whatever this was. We packed quickly, both eager to put some distance between ourselves and the unexplained. The early sun shone bright but cold, a typical alpine morning where each breath formed small crystal clouds in front of our faces. We ascended higher, navigating carefully across frozen scree and patches of snow. The terrain grew rougher, demanding our full attention. As we approached a steep ridge leading toward Taylor Peak's final scramble, something tugged at my focus. High above, silhouetted sharply against the bright sky, was a dark figure. A lone climber, maybe, but who else would be out here this early in the season? Thomas, I murmured, nudging his shoulder gently. You see that? He squinted upward, raising a gloved hand to shade his eyes. I pointed directly above us toward the sharp crest of the ridge, but the figure had vanished, as if it had been snatched away by the wind. Thomas chuckled, though his tone had changed, more nervous now. Altitude's getting to you, Jace. Nobody else out here this early. I nodded reluctantly. Maybe he was right, maybe the thin air, and that strange circle had rattled me more than I wanted to admit. We continued climbing in silence, our crampons crunching steadily into the hard-packed snow. Still, even as the summit loomed closer, I couldn't shake the image of that perfectly dry circle. It lingered in my thoughts like a splinter beneath the skin. By late afternoon, the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the mountainside. We decided together to return to our camp at Sky Pond for the night to rest and begin our descent in the morning. We arrived just before dusk, fatigue weighing heavily on my limbs. The circle was still there, unchanged, stark its precision more unsettling now in the fading light. As we settled back into our bivy sacks, zipping them tightly against the biting wind, I heard Thomas's voice softly from a few feet away. Hey Jay, I replied, eyes already drifting shut. You don't really think something's out here, right? Thomas asked quietly. I hesitated. I don't know, I replied honestly. Something's just off. He went silent, and soon I heard his breathing deepen into a steady rhythm, but I lay awake longer, listening to the wind sliding through stone and snow. The eerie hush that blanketed our high camp. Just before sleep took me. I couldn't shake the feeling, an unseen presence, eyes unknowable, unblinking, watching us from beyond the edge of that impossible circle, waiting. Sleep came in fits and starts. Every sound, the shift of fabric from Tomas, the creak of ice, high above us seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness of Sky Pond. My mind couldn't release the grip of unease. Brought on by the circle. Then, sometime after midnight, I heard something distinct. Thin, rhythmic clicks carried faintly through the cold air. Intermittent light at first. I dismissed them as ice cracking or distant rockfall, but something about the pattern felt intentional. Deliberate. I lay still, every muscle tense, ears straining in the darkness. The clicks eventually faded, swallowed by the hush of wind. Morning came reluctantly. The sun crept over the jagged ridgeline, spilling pale, weak light across the alpine basin. I sat up groggily, rubbing sleep from my eyes, and froze. Outside the circle's edge, just where the snow resumed, something new had appeared. Footprints, huge, elongated indentations stamped clearly into the pristine snow. I climbed silently from my bivy, careful not to wake Tomas, and approached them cautiously. The prints were deep, spaced far apart, far wider than my own stride. Something large, bipedal, and they started abruptly at the circle's edge, as if the thing had simply appeared, materialized. I followed the tracks slowly uphill. Each step of mine had to stretch unnaturally to match the stride. No drag marks, no stagger-clean heavy steps. Eventually they led to an open slope, and then they stopped mid-stride, just ended. The final print was clean, deep, unmistakable, but ahead nothing, no sign of turning, no slide, no jump or climb, just untouched snow and silence. I scanned the slope above. No trees, no ledges, nowhere for anything or anyone to go. My pulse pounded. I crouched over the last print, inspecting its shape. It was easily twice the size of my boot. What are you doing? I jumped. Tomas's voice broke the silence. He stood just below me, cradling a steaming mug between his gloved hands. Come here, I called back. Take a look. He climbed up beside me, his breath fogging the morning air. His expression shifted as he stared at the footprints, then back toward camp, then slowly up the slope. Okay, he muttered. That's definitely not normal. I told you, I said softly. Something's off here. Tomas exhaled, a deep, uneasy sigh. Maybe someone's messing with us. I shook my head. Who would hike this deep, leave massive tracks, and disappear? And how did they just start out of nowhere? He had no answer. Neither did I. We returned to our bivy site in silence. The weight of the unknown settled heavily between us. I reached into my pack and pulled out my compact trail camera, motion-triggered, infrared capable. We had brought it for wildlife photography, but now, let's set this up, I said. If something comes back tonight, maybe we'll catch it. Tomas nodded silently. His earlier confidence dimmed. We both understood. Even if we didn't say it out loud, this wasn't wildlife. His usual good humor had noticeably diminished. Together, we secured the trail camera to a sturdy tripod, pointing it directly at our camp. We ensured it had a clear, unobstructed field of view. Then we waited. The rest of the day passed slowly. We barely spoke, keeping ourselves busy with menial tasks: melting snow, reorganizing gear, checking and rechecking our packs. Anxiety settled deep in my chest like a weight, tight and persistent. It wouldn't release. Worse, I started experiencing brief lapses in memory. I'd set my gloves down and forget where I'd checked the GPS beacon only to find it inexplicably turned off, though I knew I hadn't touched it. Fatigue, stress, altitude. I tried to rationalize it, but deep down something more unsettling stirred. Something I couldn't explain. Night fell again, darker, quieter. The sky was thick with clouds, blotting out the stars and moon. There was no light, no comfort. Inside my bivy sack, I lay still, listening, eyes wide, straining against the black. Every sound sharpened, every silence deepened. Hours passed. Then Thomas whispered hoarsely from nearby, "Jason." I turned toward him, already on edge. "Let's check the camera," he said. We climbed out of our sacks stiffly. The snow crunched softly beneath our boots. Our breath misted rapidly in the frigid air as I removed the camera's memory card and slid it into my phone. My heart pounded. We scrolled through the images together. The first few were harmless as setting up camp, boiling snow for water, sitting and talking. Normal. My fingers swiped forward. Then I stopped cold. The timestamp read 3:12 a.m. The photo showed us clearly, visibly asleep inside our bivy sacks, but the angle was wrong. It was taken from about 5 feet above us, angled downward. I looked sharply at the tripod. It hadn't moved. The shot was impossible. The camera hadn't been triggered, hadn't shifted. "Thomas," my voice shook. "Look at this." He peered over my shoulder, his expression tightening with concern. "How?" he whispered, but never finished the thought. I clicked further into the memory card and froze. Again, there was a second folder, one we hadn't created. My hand trembled as I tapped it open. The images loaded slowly, each thumbnail flickering ominously across the screen. Photos taken before we arrived at Sky Pond. Empty landscapes, bare snow, the same clearing, the exact spot we eventually chose for our camp, photographed repeatedly from multiple angles. The same place, taken before we were even there, like something had anticipated our arrival. Neither of us spoke. Thomas looked shaken, his eyes wide and glinting with fear. "We have to get out of here," I whispered urgently. He nodded slowly, deeply. "First thing tomorrow," he said. "We're leaving." We crawled back into our bivvies without another word, but sleep was impossible. I lay wide-eyed, gripping the small knife I kept under my jacket. My fingers were numb from cold and fear. The clicking returned, sharper now, rhythmic, echoing softly from above, stone to stone, like claws tapping deliberately. Purposefully, they continued long after dawn approached. Only as the gray light of morning spilled over the basin did they finally fade. And there it was again, the circle. Still perfect, still dry, still watching. We packed hastily, moving with silent urgency. Every strap pulled tight, every buckle fastened with trembling hands. The air had turned colder. The clouds above sagged low, heavy and gray. Snow was coming, and we didn't plan to be here when it fell. Snow fell steadily now, soft and relentless. Thomas and I exchanged few words, each of us silently preparing for a quick descent toward the lock and, ultimately, back to the relative safety of the Glacier Gorge trailhead. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. There was a subtle pressure, like something hovering just at the edge of perception. Not quite seen, but undeniably present, and the image from the trail cam haunted me, our sleeping bodies captured from an impossible angle, by something or someone repressed on. The trail down was slick and treacherous. Patches of ice lurked beneath the fresh powder. Visibility worsened as fog spilled down from the peaks, thickening until the landscape blurred into vague shapes and indistinct shadows. We paused briefly. Both of us checked our GPS beacons and maps, making sure we hadn't strayed from the route. Then it happened. As we descended past Timberline Falls, Tomas's boot suddenly slipped. He dropped hard onto an ice rock, his cry cutting sharply through the muffled air. "Tomas!" I shouted, rushing toward him. His face was pale. Pain etched deep into his features. His leg twisted at a sharp, unnatural angle. "My ankle," he groaned, teeth clenched. "It's bad, Jason." Without wasting time, I reached for the Garmin SOS beacon clipped to my pack. I activated it quickly, the blinking red light offering the only comfort I had left. "Help will be here soon," I told him, trying to sound calm, but we both knew rescue at this elevation could take hours. I wrapped him gently in the emergency blanket, propping him up against a rock ledge to block some of the wind. "You stay here," I said, tightening my pack. "I'll find a better signal, maybe get a view for search and rescue." Tomas nodded faintly, his breath shaky, his eyes already dimming with pain. "Don't go far," he whispered. It wasn't a warning, it was a plea. I moved uphill carefully, looking for clearer terrain. The fog was like a curtain, shifting and swirling around me, making everything feel unfamiliar. My boots crunched through frozen moss and snow until the texture changed. I froze. The ground beneath me was different, unnatural. Another circle just like the first one. But this one was worse. It wasn't just bare earth. It was scorched, blackened. The moss and pine needles within the circle were charred and brittle. A ring of exposed burned soil stretched out with perfect, unsettling symmetry. The snow surrounding it had melted cleanly away. The air was thick with the smell of something acrid, bitter, chemical. My pulse surged. I snapped a few quick photos, compelled by some nervous instinct to document this, but what could cause such Precision, it wasn't lightning. There was no blast pattern, no randomness. The burns seemed fresh, yet there was no heat, no steam, no smoke. It was just wrong. I turned and bolted back toward Thomas, dread gnawing at my insides. When I reached him, he was slumped forward, his head hanging. "Thomas," I yelled, grabbing his shoulder. He groaned faintly, shifting just slightly, still conscious but fading fast. Time dragged. I checked the Garmin beacon again, still transmitting, still blinking, still no sign of help. The fog thickened further, muting the world around us. I stood up, straining to see through the white veil, watching, waiting. That's when I saw it at the edge of the tree line above us. Barely visible through the shifting mist. A figure stood there, still, tall, unnaturally tall, and it didn't move. Its limbs were elongated, disproportionate, not human, or at least, not anymore. It was like something trying to appear human and failing. Froze, my breath caught in my throat, my body completely still. The figure remained motionless, half hidden behind the slender trunks of lodgepole pines, its silhouette barely distinguishable in the fog. Slowly I reached into my jacket and pulled. Bet my phone. My hands trembled as I raised it, aimed it upward, and snapped a photo. The shutter clicked softly. I looked up again. Gone. Just fog, just trees. I blinked, scanning desperately, but the figure had vanished like smoke in the wind. And then through the panic and silence I heard it, a low hum, growing louder, the distant thrum of helicopter blades. Relief flooded my body, rushing in all at once. I waved both arms frantically toward the noise, signaling like a man drowning. Within minutes, the helicopter hovered overhead. A rescue team descended rapidly on ropes, shouting commands muffled by the roar of the blades. They secured Thomas quickly, strapping him to a stretcher and hoisting him into the air. One of the rangers called down to me, offering to lift me out as well, but I shook my head. Whether it was stubborn pride or something else, something irrational and primal, I couldn't say. But I had to stay grounded. I had to walk out myself. "I'll hike down," I shouted, just barely audible over the rotor wash. The ranger hesitated, clearly uneasy, then finally nodded and ascended after Thomas. In seconds, they were gone. Silence fell and I was alone again. The adrenaline that had carried me this far began to wear off. I felt the weight of everything: fatigue, dread, confusion pulling at me. I started walking downhill, each step heavy, each sound amplified. Every creak of a branch or crunch of snow made me flinch. My eyes flicked toward shadows, hoping to see anything. By the time I reached the ranger station at the trailhead, night had fully fallen. The building was quiet, lights dim, the silence heavy. A ranger met me at the entrance. His face showed concern, but also something else, something restrained. I told him everything. I showed him the photo from the trail cam, described the dry circles, the burned ground, the tracks, and finally, the thing I'd seen. His expression shifted. Something behind his eyes changed. "You're not the first," he said quietly, glancing away. "What do you mean?" I pressed. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Just forget it. Some things out here we don't talk about." I stared at him. "Go home," he said firmly. "Be glad you made it." A few days later, I was back in Boulder, far from the mountains, far from Sky Pond, far from whatever had watched us in that strange, impossible circle. Still, I couldn't let it go. I reviewed the photos again, hundreds of them. Most were nothing. Mountains, snow, trees. Then I saw it, the one image I'd taken near the tree line above Thomas. I zoomed in, and my blood ran cold. There, partially obscured behind a lodgepole pine, was the figure. Blurry, tall. Its limbs subtly wrong, distorted off. It stood motionless, but present. Real. I felt my breath shake. Quickly, I attached the photo to an email and began typing a message to the ranger station. Just a few words, just enough to ask, "What is this?" But as soon as I hit send, my laptop flickered, the screen went black. Then rebooted. The message was gone. The photo nowhere. I opened my phone. We searched every folder, every backup. Nothing. That image had vanished completely. No trace. And yet, sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the world is still, my phone flickers. Just briefly. And for a split second, too quick to capture, too fleeting to prove I see it again. That same figure. Blurred. Still. Watching. From behind the trees at the edge of Sky Pond.